Sneb's calling. Yo, Sneb. You feeling better, by the way, buddy?
Last night was rough.
Yeah.
I feel a little. Yeah, I was like doing Sarah's CM,
Yeah.
and slowly, I
Oozing.
kind of over like for a few days, and
Yeah.
I was like slowly fading away, and then I started to get like really hot. I had a bit of a fever,
Mm.
and then Trig commented, he's like, "Dude, you're like all red," and then I looked at the camera and I was like, "Yeah,
Oh,
this
no.
this is not good."
Yeah.
So, I lasted like an hour and a half into our 3 hour session. And I was like, guys, I'm actually dying. I'm gonna need a sub. But I mean, at least it shows that I'm committed. You know?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I like literally I turned off the stream. I went and took like a bunch of
The juice,
like
the
like
drugs.
cough syrup stuff, and then I just laid in bed and passed out. So then I woke up later, and yeah, now my voice is just kind of gone, but it's all right. Yeah, it's pretty good. Getting better. Snap slug. Yeah, so you know what? That's interesting. But Guild Wars 3 has a good ring to it.
Yeah. What are your overall thoughts? Actually, first of all, I want to just this is people are gonna say this is a boring question, but I think it's actually the opposite. You're a guy who looks at marketing, looks at communication, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I read this as an absolute fiesta, like ArenaNet worst nightmare moment. What do you think?
Well, this is my opinion. Obviously, I'm not in game marketing specifically, but I have some background in consumer psychology. So I look at this from that perspective, and I think this is very odd because it doesn't feel like an official announcement, and so everyone's it's like the cat's out of the bag, you know?
Yeah.
Like, they don't have a lot of control over the narrative now, and I think that that's kind of important because now you see on social media a lot of people jumping to conclusions saying Guild Wars 2 is over, maintenance mode, it's over, it's completely over, and that's probably not true, but the narrative is just going to get spun a bunch of different ways until there's an official narrative to follow. So I do think it's a bit of a setback for like I'm sure they're all sitting in meetings right now going like, how do we handle this? Like, what do we do? What do we say? Because what I anticipate is going to happen is you're going to put some blog post out that explains kind of what's going on, and it'll just reaffirm that they're not abandoning Guild Wars 2 or anything. But I think now they have to provide more information than they were probably ready to give, and that's a bit scary because they probably don't even have all the answers for everything. Like they don't know when it's going to be released or anything like that. But now everyone's going to demand a whole bunch of information that doesn't exist. So I do look at, I have a lot of empathy for the situation. I think it's going to be pretty rough to just try to dispel a lot of rumors and misconceptions, and especially when they're working with timelines that don't even really exist yet. Yeah, it's a bad situation overall.
Yeah, it's a lot of unknowns, and of course, it's very difficult for them to give any kind of answer because it's not set in stone yet, right? Like, the game is obviously in its development process, but that doesn't mean that if they make a statement now, they might not end up going that direction. I mean, look, we saw that with the Riot MMO, right? The Riot MMO basically went completely back to the drawing board very recently, and that's going to be pretty common in game dev, right? Like, you try an idea and you go, well, actually, is this really good? Is this really working out? And you go, actually, no, we should probably change that. So very difficult for ArenaNet to actually navigate this from a communication and information perspective, because I think, I think the way you put it was the best. There are questions and there aren't answers for them yet. Like, none exist. There's no information.
So now they have to come up with answers, and that's really difficult to do in a small, like, imagine how many people are communicating, right? You've got a lot of people that need to be in on meetings and discussing, and you really have to control what is being said and how it's being said. And so this is the exact opposite of that. It's out of control. Now everyone's going to say something different. Now there's going to be a whole bunch of rumors, but they do not. My guess, this is an assumption, and I mean, I guess this is part of the problem, right? This is a bit of an assumption from me, but I'm guessing that they just haven't really talked about exactly what the narrative should be. Or maybe they have, but it's pretty rudimentary at this point.
Well, they weren't expecting to have to talk about it for realistically multiple years,
not at all.
right? Like, for years. So
yeah. And so now what, right? Now they have to talk about it. Cat's out of the bag, but what is there to talk about? And now they have to make decisions that they weren't prepared to make. And frankly, they probably shouldn't have to make at this point, because what are they going to say? It's going to be unsatisfying as a consumer to hear it, no matter what they say at this point. Because they're going to be like, oh yeah, you know, you got us. Like, we have been talking about this and socializing the idea, and indeed now we do have confirmation that we can do this, but we really haven't done that much on it, so there's really nothing to say. We can't really tell you what the game is going to be like. We can't tell you if there's going to be any integration with Guild Wars 2. And like, so you're just going to be like, well, I want answers. And the answers don't exist. They can't confirm anything. And they shouldn't promise anything at this point. It's so early. So I just feel bad for them, because it's a bit of a nightmare from that perspective.
Yep. How do you feel about it from the player perspective, though? Because I would say it's pretty exciting. New game. Yeah. You know, I think I'll say where I'm at. Okay. Because I definitely feel like Guild Wars 2, it's in its final form, right? Like this is it. And that has de-energized me about the game to an extent. It's like, yep, this is Guild Wars 2. This is how it's going to be. From now on, there's not really going to be much dynamism or change or anything like that. Like, it's just going to be this game forever. So from my perspective, this is pretty interesting. Like, you know, will the game necessarily work out or be for me? Not really, but hey, there's always a chance, right? You know, you never know that something like really spicy could come out. So very exciting from my perspective, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag for players. From my perspective, I would agree. I think it's just quite exciting. Like, I'll still play Guild Wars 2. I mean, I play Guild Wars 1 every now and again, right? So I'll still always have love for Guild Wars 2. But something fresh with the IP, I think, is just going to be intriguing for consumers. I think it allows people to have a fresh start, and it invites new people to get in on the IP as well without feeling like they're behind in any way, even though Guild Wars 2 is pretty friendly with catching up in a sense. So I think all of that is good. From a sort of a grander player perspective, I think there's some anxiety about that, because people play MMOs in some ways because there's continuity and a feeling of constant progression. And I'm not even talking about like a gear and everything, but just like, oh, I'm on this path, this story, and my character is static, and I grow as a player and over time, right? And so when you look at it like that, it's kind of like the death of that experience for people. Yeah. And so they're thinking, well, this is going to dramatically shift my identity. And they have to adopt a new mentality and accept kind of a new culture with a new game. But because that's also unknown, it just creates a lot of worry with players, I would say. And particularly players that are like, well, I always want to be playing like the newest thing of the IP, because that's where all of the people are. A lot of people play MMOs for social reasons, whether or not they're explicitly social or not. They just like to be around other people. And so if they fear that's going to diminish, it might impact their investment in the game. But otherwise, I think players are probably like, oh man, like it's good to know that it's probably good to know that in some ways that the development team is more than just Guild Wars 2. You know, that they have grander aspirations and that they want to continue the IP. I think if you're a big, long-time fan of the game, you're just excited that it's going to live on and continue.
What if the entire Guild Wars 3 is just a tunnel?
Yeah, Guild Wars 3. And then you just like log in and you're like a dredge and you're like digging holes. Tunnel.
Yeah. I love tunneling.
Yeah. Like, what if Guild Wars 3 is actually just Guild Wars 2, but from like an underground perspective?
Yeah.
They tried to pitch an underground expansion and it like didn't fly, but then somebody, you know, really flexed their muscles and just made it the new IP. So now you're all dredge. There is no human. You must play dredge. But the screen is kind of like dark because dredge are blind, right? So like so there's like limited vision. So you're really role playing, and you just have to like dig tunnels around Tyria. There you go.
And that's the whole game.
That's the whole game.
Yeah. It's pretty big. It's pretty big stuff. What do you think, how different do you, what do you think they're going to do with the game? That's what I want to know. Like what do you think their strategy is going to be when it comes to making, is the game going to be very, very different? Or is the game going to be similar to Guild Wars 2?
Yeah.
That's a big one, right? Like, what are they going to do?
I don't know. This is another player anxiety, I think. Guild Wars 1 is vastly different than Guild Wars 2.
Of course.
In gameplay, in tone, in style, in everything. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just different. And so will Guild Wars 3 continue that trend and be vastly different than Guild Wars 1 and 2? Will it adopt some things from Guild Wars 1 and 2? Will it be very similar to Guild Wars 2, but just updated in some way? I don't know. At this point, I think it's quite hard to even project that. But if I were to guess, I would say that they're going to try to appeal to a broader MMO audience, similar to what other MMOs and stuff have done. And look, people, let's just be frank here. The number one demographic for Guild Wars 2 are the people that aren't really as engaged with the game mechanics and such, but that do like the role play and the story and all of those things. So when I think about a Guild Wars 3, I know some people are gonna hate this, but I do question like their commitment to the combat system and stuff, because I just like that's just not that important to most players, I think. And you can tell me if I'm wrong about that, but it just feels like it's maybe not the priority. I think the priority would be like the experience that people have going from place to place and engaging with the story and fashion wars and home instance and those kinds of things. So like what comes to mind is like Palia, right? You've heard of Palia?
Yeah.
It's like a non-combat MMO, right? You're just kind of like adventuring around. Now, do I think they'd go that far? Probably not, because that'd be so vastly different than Guild Wars 1 and 2. But it does have me questioning it. It's like Guild Wars 2 started as like, you know, they were really invested in PvP and stuff, and so was Guild Wars 1. But now it's like, well, would they really do that from an economic standpoint? Probably not, especially when their dominant demographic just dislikes those things so strongly. So, yeah. Oh, and chat, I don't think you're Care Bears. If you're in this chat, you're most likely somebody... You're most likely somebody that, like me, enjoys the combat system. I'm just saying the reality here. A lot of people don't care about that as much. And so how invested will they be in that? I don't know. I wouldn't go full doom and say that it's going to be like Palia or anything, but I think that they might try to simplify things so that it's easier for people to understand.
I think they're going to be
not necessarily be a bad
I think they're going to
thing.
be very focused on some aspects, right? They want stuff like the movement to be fun. They want the mounts to be fun, probably, all that kind of stuff. That's going to be, I think, a core focus of the game. But will they streamline the game down a little bit and remove some of the complexity? Probably. I think especially when it comes to gearing and itemization is going to get simplified a lot. I think one thing that really comes to mind, actually, for me, is very much something that Isaiah Cartwright said in an interview. A Manor-Works Reddit post a long time ago. This is a company where a lot of ex-ArenaNet devs are working now. They're working on Bird Simulator, Sneb. Seagull Simulator. That's not the point.
Yes.
The point is that there some Guild Wars 2 players basically asked some questions. And one of the questions was, like, what did you learn from the development of Guild Wars 2? And like, what would you kind of change, right? And the answer was too many game modes, right? Like, streamline and distill the game modes down. And I think that something we would see in Guild Wars 3 is less game modes. Specifically, I think they'd drop PvP. I'm pretty sure they'd actually keep World versus World, but I think they'd probably either make PvP very irrelevant, or very heavily just not existing in the game, even, to be honest. And World versus World is basically going to be like the kind of PvP style content that you can expect from the game. I would say. Like, that's something that I could see happening. Because I do think it has been something that has caused Guild Wars 2 to have issues, is the sheer amount of game modes the game has. Like, it's very difficult. We've seen them struggle to maintain them all, right? Like, in fact, they have not been able to maintain them all. Like, we know this. They haven't been able to do it. So that would be something that I could 100% see them doing, like really focusing in. And similarly with the PvE stuff, right? I wonder if they would consider, I mean, I think they'd probably want to do raids and dungeons in the game, but I wonder if they would actually consider kind of an approach where actually you only have one of those. Like maybe everything is 8-player content, right, instead. So you don't actually have a distinction between a raid and a dungeon, because again, like, we know that ArenaNet struggles to release kind of enough content to do all of that, because think about it, right? In Guild Wars 2, what are we getting? We get 2 raid bosses a year and 1 dungeon a year right now. They can't be happy with that, right? That's not a lot of content. I think it would be quite interesting if they did actually go for, you know, a different approach there. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess I'm just, I'm, yeah, I mostly agree. I just don't have too much more to add. I am very curious to see how far they're willing to change things. I think they need to commit to a few game modes, and because the reality is that if you try to be good at everything, you're actually good at nothing. You're just like a generalist. Yeah. And I actually think that's probably a good way to describe Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 is like the perfect generalist MMO. You want a taste of everything. You're gonna get like pretty good content in every game mode. Yeah. But are you gonna get the best content in every game mode? I don't know. I think you can make an argument that open world is really, really well done. I think open world is best in class. Really, really good too. Yeah. I think you can argue all of those things, but the problem is that you don't really have a very strong development cycle if you have to pay attention to every game mode all at once. It's difficult to balance things. It takes a lot of dev time, and you have these massive content droughts for one game mode or another. Like look at World versus World. What's going on there, right? They've had a few like cool titles and whatever added, and I think those are really good quality of life changes. But it's not like they're getting new maps and siege and like stuff, right? They're just not. You know what's funny, Snub? So where does this leave you? Guild Wars 3 might come out before Alliances. That's reality. Yeah. Enjoy it. That well, that will probably happen. Yeah. Enjoy it. Yeah. Yeah, Sneb is speechless. He can't handle that. He's broken. He's broken on a mental level. And I think it would be really cool if they did actually have a heavy focus on world versus world. Because someone in the chat said that structured PvP is very casual friendly. And I definitely know what you're saying with the click and play. But I actually feel that like world versus world with a couple of modifications could be even better. Because world versus world is very hop in, hop out. And yes, sometimes nothing happens. That is kind of a side effect of the way the game plays out. Like, you know, there's not any content going on or something like that. But I feel like world versus world is perfect for casual PvP because your individual contribution matters far less. I know that sounds like a bit of a meme, but I think it really actually helps players who maybe have some anxiety around getting into player versus player content from just getting in there. Because in a 5v5 PvP game, you can single-handedly troll and throw the game, and that I feel like that's a lot of pressure. That's pretty intense, right? For newer players, right? That, you know, that's a lot to deal with. So yeah, I actually think that like having it basically be very casual friendly, I think is in World vs. World, it's good. Yeah, I think it's very good for that. And I also think it really leans into the MMO element of it as well, which I think is actually really good too. Like, let's be honest here. Modern MMOs are barely MMOs, right? They're barely even MMORPGs. They're basically instant simulators. I would say that both World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy actually fall into that category. Yeah,
they're scuffed in a lot of ways. Guild Wars 2 is pretty much the only MMO that does the open world thing, or at least only major MMO that does like the full open world thing in terms of its PvP and PvP content, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, WoW and Final Fantasy are lobby sims. Guild Wars 2 isn't, and I think that's what World vs. World is really good for, because it's MMO. Like, World vs. World is MMO PvP. Whereas, like, retail, yeah, don't get me wrong, I'm sure arenas are fun, and, you know, Guild Wars 2 5v5 PvP is fun, but it's not really MMO, right? You know? Yeah, remake World vs. World from scratch. And they've got some serious work to do, though. Like, you know, we're all kind of getting, you know, we're all going crazy and getting hyped up right now. Bear in mind, guys, you've got to bear in mind, they could fail to make this game. And I don't want to, like, you know, start dooming but ahead of time, but this is still a very big risk. Like, we're assuming that everything goes perfectly for ArenaNet, and I hate to say it, the track record isn't there, let's be honest. Like, all of these unannounced projects for ArenaNet, they've basically all failed. So, yeah. Ooh.
You know what I'm most looking forward to in, you know, in a new title?
Yeah. What?
No more random content bloat. Like, oh, we have Dragon Response missions and Strike missions and raids and dungeons and fractals.
Yeah.
And, like, please, for the love of all that is good, just, like, stick to a couple things.
Yeah.
Like, this makes it so complicated for people to figure out what's actually going on.
It certainly does give them a fresh start to remove all of that stuff, for sure. I think that's definitely one of the most exciting prospects. Guild Wars 2 is a massively bloated game, and streamlining that down is one of the things that is probably going to be objectively better, right? About a new title, is that it should theoretically have less of those issues.
Yeah, you know, I've got a good meme here, you know.
Yeah.
I think that they, like, imagine they're all at some kind of meeting, right? And they're pitching, like, what to do about Guild Wars 2. And, and somebody's just like, there's too many currencies, what should we do? And they're like, what if we just start over?
Yeah. Or just, you know, just do an entirely new game. Yeah. That might be the way to go.
Like, we've got too many currencies. Yeah. It's over. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah. We cannot continue.
It's only programmed to allow so many. We have to do something.
How would you feel if it's just this actually wasn't April's Fool's joke, but they just got the date wrong?
Oh boy, that would be catastrophic.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously not, but it would be very funny, in my opinion. Yeah. But do you have any other thoughts? You know, it's weird, actually. I feel like I should have a lot to say on this, and I think we've said a lot. But on the other hand, you know, we know nothing. Oh, we have literally zero information to go on, right? So it's obviously...
I mean, we can project all day, but I think that's part of the problem. Yeah. We can sit here and just theorize about what's going to happen, and that's the worst case. Well, it's good and bad in some ways. Like, it gets conversation about the game going, but it just can spread false narratives, and there's no control of the narrative right now.
Yeah.
And that's a bit of a marketing nightmare.
Yeah.
Community management nightmare. They don't want people to, like, panic, right? Because now a lot of people that are maybe getting introduced to the game that are those kind of players are like, I really want to invest in MMO. They're going to look at it and go, well, they're at least going to ask the question, like, should I invest in this MMO if the sequel is coming out? Nah, maybe not. And that's not a good thing for them.